With 23 titles in the last 30 years, Formula One would seem to have been most recently dominated by the British. That wasn't always the case in the history of Grand Prix racing, in fact, far from it. French manufacturers were the main pioneers of motorsport, and so were French organisers, for it was the Automobile Club de France who organised what is largely regarded to be the first Grand Prix way back in 1906. Run on closed roads near Le Mans, it was won by a Renault driven by the Hungarian Ferenc Sis, who beat the Fiat of Felice Nazzaro. A year later, the latter took his revenge at Dieppe. And a year later again, Germany scored a 1-2-3 when Lautenschlager won in a Mercedes ahead of the Benz of Hemery and Henriot on the same circuit. Thus, the scene was set. For the next 50 years or so, French, Italians and Germans would battle for supremacy. After the heroic age of the city-to-city races at the end of the 19th century, the first Grand Prix were disputed by cars that were still primitive, but already powerful. In spite of a pleasant, warm and sunny day and a slippery surface, Sis's Renault's average speed was over 60 miles an hour. 70 years would elapse before a Renault would enter a Grand Prix again. The occasion was the British Grand Prix at Silverstone on July the 16th, 1977. It may have been symbolic, but it was a return to racing that would prove to be tough, particularly as it aroused as much sarcasm as interest. That was because the Renault Elf RS01 was powered by an innovative 1.5-litre V6 turbocharged engine. At that time, all other Formula One cars were powered by normally aspirated 3-litre engines. That is to say, twice as big as the little Renault, as laid down by the regulations. According to the engineers of the time, this was too great a handicap to the turbos. But for the moment, Renault were coping with the constant development pains of their new engine and those who mocked their imprudence.
Traditionnellement, les turbocompresseurs équipent les camions, les bateaux, les tracteurs, les engins de chantier, mais jusqu'à présent, il n'équipait pas très souvent les moteurs à essence et très peu les moteurs à essence très fortement performants comme les moteurs du Mans ou de Formule 1. Donc nous nous sommes heurtés à des inconvénients, je dirais, technologiques uniquement liés à notre jeunesse dans cette technologie. Nous nous sommes heurtés donc à notre propre incompétence, à dessiner les pièces qui résistaient aux très fortes pressions, aux très fortes températures qui sont générées dans ce moteur. Et nos sous-traitants ont eu le même mal que nous à mettre au point les pièces qui nous fournissaient, comme les pistons, les segments, les turbos eux-mêmes, etc.
In spite of the setbacks, Renault persevered.
La période de mise au point du moteur 1500 a été très longue et bien entendu nous sommes passés par des périodes très difficiles, disons où nous avions conscience que nous avions la possibilité de faire quelque chose, mais où les progrès malgré tout étaient très lents. Et là je dois dire que nos ingénieurs, eux, n'ont jamais perdu confiance et ça c'est très important de le dire, ils ont toujours cru que le moteur Renault Turbo allait battre les moteurs atmosphériques.
Renault's first Formula One driver, Jean-Pierre Jabouille, scored their first World Championship points with fourth in the 1978 American Grand Prix, and then went on to score their first win in the French Grand Prix at Dijon. It was an historic double, 72 years after Sis's victory in the inaugural running of the same event. When Alain Prost, the great hope of French motorsport, joined the team in the early 80s, everyone thought that their golden boy would be the final element that could eventually bring the World Championship to the French manufacturer and its Formula One team. Backing up that view was that turbocharging was clearly the way to go. Every other Formula One team had a turbocharged engine. So, technologically speaking, Renault had won. But that was as close as they got to the title. They never finally managed to lift the title, which would have been the icing on the cake. Even so, the Renault Elf Turbo was undoubtedly the car to beat between 1981 and 1983. Prost and teammate René Arnoux started from pole 10 times in 1982, but they won only 4 races, suggesting a lack of reliability which the team never quite overcame. However, the Renault Sport engineers steadily overcame the drawbacks associated with turbo engines, such as the problems of detonation, turbo lag, and the sudden arrival of power, which could make the driver's task so difficult. Unfortunately, the progress in technology was not accompanied by similar progress in the structure and organisation of the team, which was top-heavy and ponderous. 3 seasons running, Prost was in contention for the title, and he should have won in 1983. But Renault was beaten in the end by Piquet's Brabham BMW, and the French team would never recover from such terrible disappointment after 6 years of intensely hard but ultimately fruitless work.
Pendant pas mal de temps, chez Renault, ils n'ont pas assez cru les pilotes. Moi, en l'occurrence, à un certain moment, comme moi je demandais pas mal de choses, on m'avait interdit l'entrée de l'usine parce que on considérait que je dérangeais. Et puis on m'a dit un jour, on m'a fait la réponse, d'ailleurs c'est pour ça que moi je suis parti de chez Renault, que moi j'étais peut-être pressé de gagner des courses, mais qu'eux ils n'étaient pas pressés. Donc quand des responsables disent ça dans une équipe de Formule 1, ça veut tout dire. Donc moi je suis parti, et puis ils ont dégoûté tout le monde. Alain m'a remplacé, et puis ils ont dégoûté Alain. Moi franchement j'ai même cru qu'ils allaient être champions du monde avec Alain, parce que quand je suis parti je leur ai dit qu'ils ne seraient jamais champions du monde. Franchement, ça a été du gâchis. Pour moi, ils auraient dû être champions du monde au moins 2-3 fois.
The Renault Turbo era thus ended in frustration and bitterness when, at the end of 1985, a serious crisis caused the French company to wind down its Formula One involvement. Even so, it had much to be proud of. 29 pole positions, 20 fastest laps, and 15 victories. And if nothing else, Renault's innovative step and their emphasis on marketing and public relations meant that Formula One reached an audience and attained a popularity which it had never before enjoyed. But their campaign lacked that final crowning glory, the title, and Renault didn't want that failure hanging over them. So once their finances had been sorted out, the French company re-entered Grand Prix racing at the beginning of 1989, this time as the engine supplier to the English Williams team. By this time, the rules had changed and the 1.5 turbocharged engines had been replaced by 3.5-litre normally aspirated units. Renault designed and built a V10 for this formula, and it would soon be the engine to beat. Finally, in 1992, helped by an advanced suspension system, Williams-Renault and driver Nigel Mansell won the constructors' and drivers' titles, deposing the McLaren-Honda team. While Renault could boast victory in the first ever Grand Prix, Alfa Romeo could lay claim to winning the first World Championship back in 1925 and taking victory in the first Formula One Grand Prix and the inaugural Formula One World Championship in 1950. The Milan manufacturer's early success coincided with the debut of its P2 in 1924. This was the work of the famous Vittorio Jano, dismissed from Fiat by one of the Alfa Romeo team drivers, namely Enzo Ferrari. The heart of the P2 was the magnificent 2-litre 8-cylinder twin-cam engine, which supercharged gave 155 horsepower, more than 75 horsepower per litre, which wasn't bad at all for the 20s. The P2 story is inextricably linked to Antonio Ascari, who, having given the car a victorious debut in its first race at Cremona, went on to win the French Grand Prix at Lyon and then the Italian Grand Prix, completing a triumphant trio of races for Alfa Romeo. Sadly, Ascari would be killed in his P2 the following year while leading the French Grand Prix.
Cette Alfa Romeo P2, elle a couru aussi en 1925, où elle a gagné le premier championnat du monde de l'histoire. C'est un peu un drôle de championnat du monde, c'était un championnat du monde par marque. Le pointage était un peu drôle parce qu'une victoire donnait 1 point, une deuxième place, si je me rappelle bien, 2 points, etc. Et une voiture qui ne participait pas à la course, elle prenait automatiquement, je crois, 8 ou 10 points, quelque chose comme ça. Donc à la fin de l'année, c'était la marque qui avait le moins de points, qui était champion du monde. Donc Alfa Romeo gagne le premier championnat du monde. Et c'est depuis là que autour du badge Alfa Romeo, il y a cette couronne, justement pour marquer ce championnat du monde.
Later, modified P2s were run by a new team, one Scuderia Ferrari, which would expand further when it was officially asked to run the P2's successor, the P3. This was a proper single-seater. The riding mechanic's seat was dispensed with, and the driver's seat was centrally mounted, thanks to a new, innovative transmission system. Power was transmitted to the rear wheels by two drive shafts, which formed an inverted V because the differential was fitted to the back of the gearbox. Jeannot's 8-cylinder, twin-supercharged engine gave 215 horsepower in its 2.6-litre version, then 260 when bored to 2.9 litres. Light and beautifully balanced, the P3 was quicker than both the Bugattis and Maseratis. But the might of Germany, in the shape of Mercedes' Auto Union from 1934 onwards, was a different matter. However, Nuvolari gave Alfa a glorious swan song by winning the greatest of his races, the 1935 German Grand Prix.
Ce Grand Prix d'Allemagne, c'est un peu la course qui a marqué la P3 parce que c'était déjà un peu une pauvre voiture, si on veut parler comme ça, une voiture qui avait déjà plusieurs années. Elle a réussi à battre les Auto Union et les Mercedes-Benz. Bon, elle ne les a pas battus directement. Ces voitures allemandes ont eu des tas de problèmes techniques, surtout des problèmes de pneus, ce qui a permis à Nuvolari de gagner la course.
But sheer heroism isn't enough in motorsport, and just before the start of the Second World War, a new Alfa Romeo appeared. This was the famous Alfetta, but because of the hostilities, it would not begin to make its name until 1947.
La 158 è nata a Modena, progettata dai progettisti Colombo Gioacchino, Massimino e Bazzi. Erano i tre capi della Ferrari. Poi nel 1938 Ferrari da Modena è passato all'Alfa Corse di Milano. Naturalmente venendo a Milano ha portato la 158 all'Alfa Romeo.
The Alfetta would become one of the most famous cars in Grand Prix racing, thanks to tremendous success in its two versions. First of all, there was the 158, which won the first Formula One World Championship in 1950 in Farina's hands. Its 1.5-litre engine, 8 cylinders with two-stage supercharging, gave 300 horsepower. That is, more than 200 horsepower per litre. The 158s won every one of the 11 races in which they ran in 1950, including the 6 Grand Prix, which counted for the new World Championship. Then, a new, even more powerful version appeared for 1951, called the Type 159. This extraordinary machine reached the peak of supercharging technology. We are still in the 50s, and yet this remarkable 1.5-litre 8-cylinder engine gave 350 horsepower and then 425. That is nearly 300 horsepower per litre, and the car's top speed was over 300 kph, 186 miles per hour. Thanks to progress, Alfa Romeo followed up their previous year's title won by Farina with Fangio's first of 5 world titles, one driving the superb Alfetta.
Era una macchina molto nobile, è un gruppo di lavoranti che lavoravano molto forte sulle macchine e questo era lo principale. Sì. Il ricordo sono molto bello. Sì. Sono 2 anni che sono corso con loro, ho vinto il primo campionato 40 anni fa.
But this kind of technology had reached its limit, and the 4.5-litre normally aspirated Ferrari would take over. Alfa pulled out at the end of 1951. Its less glorious return to Formula One in the 70s and 80s did nothing to eclipse the glorious career of the Alfetta. The other great manufacturer of the 20s and 30s was that of Ettore Bugatti, the most illustrious member of a dynasty of very talented craftsmen who established himself in the Alsace area of France, having emigrated from Italy. An expert in engineering, the family's creative streak led him to design his cars as works of art. His masterpiece was certainly the incomparable Type 35, which, from 1924, was the first production Grand Prix car. Over a decade, around 400 models in various versions were produced. In the latter half of the 20s and early 30s, the Type 35s made up the majority of the field, either driven by professionals or amateurs. And it was thanks to this car and its variations that Bugatti has one of the most illustrious records in Grand Prix racing, on a par with Alfa Romeo, Ferrari, Lotus and McLaren. The Type 35 made its debut at the European Grand Prix at Lyon in 1924. The regulations allowed for a maximum engine capacity of 2 litres and a minimum weight of 560 kilos. The Bugattis were immediately the sensation of the field with their lightness, balance and aesthetically pleasing shape and size. There were several innovations, not the least their cast aluminium wheels, whereas everyone else used wire wheels. But these proved to be the team's downfall in this European Grand Prix, for the wheels required special tyres, which had not been sufficiently tested beforehand. But this was only a temporary setback. Ettore Bugatti's masterpiece would go on to win many races in the years to come. Bugatti eschewed the supercharger to begin with, and the Type 35's original 2-litre straight-8 engine, however beautiful it may have been, only developed around 100 horsepower, while its rivals, thanks to supercharging, developed considerably more. The fact that the Type 35s were able to challenge cars with perhaps 50% more power was thanks to their excellent road holding. However, in the end, Bugatti followed the trend and took the supercharging route as well. So the Type 51 of the early 30s had a 2.3-litre engine which gave 170 horsepower. Even so, the Bugattis continued to be competitive thanks to their easy inbuilt simplicity, which made them not only efficient on all types of circuit, but also allowed amateurs to buy them and race them with success during these crazy years. Fifi Étincelin and his legendary cap worn back to front was the archetypal gentleman driver of the period, typical of the driver who found success in the 30s in spite of not being in a factory team. Chiron, Varzi were also helped on their way by driving Bugattis, while René Dreyfus, Robert Benoit and the Williams were among so many others who found themselves behind the wheel of one of these agile machines, neither revolutionary nor very advanced, but which benefited sufficiently from the simple mechanical intuition of the man who designed them. While the production side of Bugatti's racing was one of his company's more lucrative operations, Mercedes' involvement in Grand Prix racing was all about the company's and its nation's image. That was why the German firm's participation was only occasional, unlike Bugatti's before the war and Ferrari's after the war. In all, Mercedes launched 3 well-reasoned offensives, 2 before the 2 world wars, largely for propaganda reasons, and 1 in the 50s to demonstrate that after the defeat and destruction, the company and country were back on their feet again. But apart from the motivation involved, there was also one fascinating characteristic which linked these 3 periods, and that is that they were all very successful. No other major manufacturer so successfully obliterated the opposition each time they went racing. The first chapter of this trilogy covered 1914. Mercedes hadn't had much success against Renault and Fiat between 1906 and 1908, but now returned in force for the French Grand Prix. Peugeot, revolutionary with brakes on all 4 wheels, were the favourites, while the 4.5-litre German cars were more conventional with brakes on only the rear wheels. But it was the latter team that won, the tough cars finishing 1st, 2nd and 3rd. A few weeks later, war broke out, and only the memory and significance of that victory remained. The second chapter began with the arrival to power of Hitler in 1933. Immediately, the Führer encouraged German manufacturers to start building Grand Prix cars, which would demonstrate that the Third Reich was capable of dominating Europe. The famous Dr. Ferdinand Porsche designed the revolutionary Auto Union, with its V16 engine mounted between the driver's back and the rear axle. Mercedes, however, went for a more conventional design, and their approach turned out to be the more realistic and efficient. Their front-mounted straight 8-cylinder engine developed 325 horsepower, which was around 100 per litre, more than any other engine at the time. The 1934 W125 was also the first Grand Prix car to be equipped with independent suspension and hydraulic brakes. The German steamroller, enjoying greater investment than ever before, began to obliterate the lightweight French and Italian opposition in the second half of the 1934 season. The age of the Silver Arrows was nigh. The auto unions, however, were very difficult to drive. Dr. Porsche had been right to mount the engine behind the driver, but he was many years too early. It would be another 25 years before Cooper got it right and won with this layout. But the two German firms continued their private rivalry and spent vast quantities of money in their attempt to reap the rich rewards promised by Hitler for the best German Grand Prix car. In 1935, the Mercedes W125 was giving 400 horsepower against the 375 of rivals Auto Union. The next year, however, in spite of more than 500 horsepower and a new, lower and more compact chassis, they were less successful due to a lack of reliability. But they took their revenge in 1937 with an engine pushed to 5.6 litres and now giving more than 650 horsepower. Never before had Grand Prix cars been so quick, now capable of more than 300 kph, nearly 190 mph. But that pushed the governing body to limit engine capacity for the 1938 season.
Mercedes a décidé de faire une 3 litres 12 cylindres avec compresseur et de nouveau il y a eu un pas important dans l'histoire, c'était la première voiture à double compresseur. Donc le 3 litres donnait autour de 400 chevaux à l'époque et je pense déjà on tournait entre 8500 et 9000 tours. Elle consommait, une voiture comme ça, une trentaine de litres d'huile par Grand Prix. Et la consommation de l'essence, qui était une essence très très spéciale, dépassait de loin les 100 litres par 100 km de course.
It was finally the war that brought to an end the fantastic run of success enjoyed by the Mercedes steamroller as they vied with Auto Union for national honour. Between them, they had made the late 30s one of the most remarkable periods in the history of motorsport. After their formidable racing cars had conquered Europe's motor racing circuits, the Third Reich's equally impressive war machine set out to conquer the continent. The great campaign of the Silver Arrows may have reduced Grand Prix racing to Nazi propaganda, but it was also one of the most impressive epochs in motorsport. The final chapter in the saga of Mercedes in Grand Prix racing took place 15 years later, when the W196 revived the Silver Arrows legend at the French Grand Prix at Reims. This time, Mercedes' engineers had gone for innovation to show the entire world that the company had become the prestigious flag bearer of the re-emerging industrial Germany.
Io credo che questa macchina era una macchina di avanzata. È nato dopo la guerra, motore desmodronico, non aveva nessun costinetto di metallo in nessuna parte, vuol dire che non si poteva rompere. E questo è molto importante per un pilota che sa che la macchina non si rompe. Solamente io pensare alla sua persona e portarla in fondo. Sì, sì.
The cars had all-enveloping, streamlined bodywork for fast circuits. The engines featured direct fuel injection, another first, and desmodromic distribution, a rarity. Mercedes was again well-funded and strengthened its chances by employing Juan Manuel Fangio and Stirling Moss, the best two drivers of the time. Immediately, there was no contest. The German cars won 10 of the 12 Grand Prix in which they raced during the 1954 and 1955 seasons. The team, still ruled by the iron hand of Alfred Neubauer, had the great fortune to enjoy much greater finance than that available to its rivals. To ensure its success at any price, Mercedes used a steamroller to overcome rivals which were no greater than mosquitoes. Tragically, in June 1955, a Mercedes sports car left the road at Le Mans and killed nearly 100 spectators. At the end of the season, the German company pulled out of motor racing.